Welcome to the Legion Strength and Conditioning Podcast. You can check us out at legionsc.com or follow us on Instagram at legion.sc. On this episode of the Legion Podcast, we are going to be topical and discuss some of the testing at the 2020 CrossFit Games and just give some thoughts on the event design, the event structure, the overall quality of the test, etc. And I'll give just some vague thoughts before we dive into too many of the details. I thought the testing was actually really, really good this year. You know, there's always a little bit of tension between the ideas of fitness as a whole and sort of like what CrossFit has kind of established as the testing parameters specifically for the sport. And if you're willing to kind of accept CrossFit's definition of fitness relative to the sport, I think the testing this year was some of the best, right? And what I mean by that is like, okay, you know, is your ability to tolerate just an ungodly amount of upper body pushing and pulling indicative of your fitness? If yes, then you know that you have to sort of take that as a given to evaluate the test properly, I think. Also some things like handstand walking, which, you know, depending on what you mean by fitness, like that's kind of like, okay, that's just sort of a little bit of a party trick and a skill that I don't love as like a fitness test per se, but given that that's kind of on the table and established as a big part of CrossFit testing, you know, I'm not gonna complain about the fact that, again, there was a significant component of handstand walking as a test. But overall, I was pretty pleased with the design of the events, and you know, we're gonna maybe dig into some more details about what the testing actually looked like. So, John, what do you think? What are your thoughts on the tests?
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting year. I think overall the testing was pretty good. It was relatively varied. They had a decent mix of body weight and medium load and heavy load. They had a pretty good mix of longer and shorter workouts. As a testing as a whole, I liked it. There were definitely some issues within there that I wasn't a fan of. But as a whole, it was good. I think day one was pretty brutal in terms of the volume that it did and the type of work they did. You know, they had opened it up with 50 bar muscle ups and 35 shoulder to overheads at, what was it, 235, 145.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, that's a reasonable amount of volume for an opening workout. I think the hill sprint was, I mean, I liked that workout. I liked it back in 2009 when they did it. I think it's just a brutal test. And it doesn't matter who it is. Every time you see someone comes sprinting out the gate and they're walking pretty quickly. And that's the way you have to play it. You can't walk from the start. That's not going to work. You can't try and pace it too much at the beginning. But yeah, the total day one, they could have ended it at the handstand sprint and that would have been a tough day. And then they threw in that run, which was, you know, an hour of running on a trail is pretty significant. So, yeah, I mean, tough day one. Day two, I think, was pretty well designed. The toe to bar lunge, pretty simple. I think sometimes games programming can get a little too complex. And it was nice to see something that was just some straight work capacity. The snatching was good. I really liked the bike and rope climb one. That's, you know, throwing in working on an actual bike as opposed to an assault bike. And, you know, especially seeing that final round when it was, Fraser and Adler. Was it Adler?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Who were like going at it on the final bike, like, I think it was a well-designed event, both in terms of logistics and the work that was being done. So, yeah, I mean, overall, I was a big fan of the games this year in terms of the events programmed. I wasn't a big fan of the fact that there was only 5 people on each side. And I think, you know, we always look at people going from the open to regionals, and then a few people who do well in the open don't do well at regionals. And the same going from qualifying from regionals to the games. There's always a few people who just can't hack it at that next level up. And you can almost guarantee that if there had been a field of 20 on each side at the games, you would not have had the same top 5. I don't think you'd have had the same podium on either side. Yeah, Matt and Tia would have still won, but I don't think any of the people on the podium apart from Matt and Tia would have been there if the field had been bigger.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I think that you see that even with the sort of qualifying stage that they had this year, where they were able to be a little bit more creative with some of the testing, et cetera, you always run into the issues that you're talking about, John, where it's like, okay, the tests leading into the higher stages of competition don't have anything that even closely resembles something like that, the corn sack sprint, right? Like a very high power output, very short event. Even if you're testing something that is a little bit shorter in the gym, it's just not the same thing at all, right? And you don't get anything that even closely resembles something like that snatch triple, right, where they had to go through the ladder, right? You don't get anything that that incorporates swimming, right? There's all these pieces where you can have someone has the limb length and the body type and whatever to just do really, really well at burpees and pull-ups and thrusters and double unders and heavy weights and medium weights and every combination of that. But it's just not the same thing to do these like very short, high power output events involving running or sled pushing or whatever. And then we have things like the handstand walk or swimming, which are just like, not too different from being like, all right, guys, like we're going to do a free throw contest. Right, we're just going to shoot 100 free throws, and whoever has the most wins. And it's like, cool. If you grew up shooting free throws and practice shooting free throws, you win that event, and everyone else loses. So I think that there's just so many aspects of the testing at the higher levels of competition that you either can't test properly or just don't get tested properly in the qualifying stages.
And that is the nature of the qualifying process this year. And, it is what it is. But it's the same as when people complain about the cuts that were made last year. And it's like, yeah, they made cuts after the first, was it the first one event or first two events? First two?
First event.
First event. And you look at that and it's like, yeah, people were complaining because you didn't get a chance to test everyone's fitness. You have one slight weakness and you're out of the games already.
Yeah. It will be. Go on, John. As you can say, it will be interesting when we essentially just have a season which is as normal or as regular as what would have been of 2018, where there's definitely some people who I think definitely people would agree that deserve to be within the sort of within the competition this year and the last year as well towards the latter stages, but they weren't. It will be interesting to sort of see that, but just sort of to circle back to it. But it's as much as the games does throw in different elements each year and just changes it up just enough just to sort of push those elite athletes into a bit of discomfort to be like, okay, I actually need to change this in my training. One year it was a pegboard, and then very early on it was like, okay, they incorporated swimming, and then I remember they did that sort of mini triathlon type thing back in like 2012 or something like that. But each year there's always these certain elements that sort of get added. But that's how people. That's how a lot of the elite athletes are training now. Is the gym stuff is the real base. That's the stuff that they're confident in, and then trying to get them to sort of venture out and do things like mountain biking, going swimming on a regular basis, trying to do higher skill gymnastics type stuff like that. That's sort of, there's a sort of a clear delineation of that. But yeah, I think that what was interesting was it would have been great to see more people there. However, with 5 people, it was still quite actually entertaining. And I think that the way that they sort of did this point spread, and they that kept it very, very interesting up until like the last couple of workouts. So it was almost, okay, you're watching, the first place is pretty much booked in after a certain amount of events, but then you are looking at, okay, who's going to be coming second, who's going to be coming third, and who's actually just going to give Matt and Tia a bit of a run for their money on this workout. Definitely there would have been people who are usually in the games who weren't there this year and weren't there last year, who would have given them some good challenges.
I think that looking at the lineups beforehand, like you look at who's competing, and I wasn't convinced that there was anyone there that had a chance to beat Matt and Tia.
Yeah, no way.
And, you know, not
I mean,
to
even if everyone in the
disrespect
entire
people,
world got to participate, it wouldn't have mattered.
right. But there are some people who you feel might have a better chance of winning
Sure.
than the people who were there. Less so on the women's side. You know, Carrie Pierce has been in the mix for a while in terms of podium area. I don't think she's been on the podium before, but
No, it was her first time.
yeah. But then you look at the kind of people that weren't there who are perennial podium, you know, Cara Saunders?
Cara Saunders, yeah.
Cara Saunders. You know, Kristen Holty, Jamie Green, those kind of athletes who are kind of continually up at the podium level. You know, Velna, Fikowski, who's the European guy?
Jorgvin?
Yes. Yeah. You know, those guys who are consistently like top 5 at the games, they're going to be able to potentially mix up the standings enough. You know, as one of them going to beat Matt in every event? No. But it might mean that Matt doesn't win every event.
Right.
It might mean that there are like 5 events he doesn't win and still wins overall. But, you know, there's a little more there. But again, that's the process it was this year, and that's what they had to do to qualify, and those perennial podium athletes didn't do that this year.
Yeah, and I don't want to come across as critical of the way that the games ended up operating this year, because there were multiple wild constraints on it, right? Because, you know, given pandemic situations and travel restrictions, et cetera, you know, they obviously just had to do what they could to even make the event happen. And then even before that, you know, I mean, at this stage, I think we can all sort of say without fear of repercussion that the entire impulsive restructuring of the CrossFit Games season, sort of unilaterally by Greg Glassman a few years ago, was interesting and had some good ideas, but was like honestly a shit show, right? And that, you know, everyone involved
he opened his mouth and then he was like, oh, actually, I need to do this.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So that the entire competition season, from the open being moved and the different sanctionals process, you know, et cetera, like all that stuff was just kind of like, okay, this sort of doesn't make that much sense, but everyone's rolling with it. And I think that given all of those issues, you know, the fact that the CrossFit Games happened at all and seemed to go well, and that they took athlete safety somewhat seriously, and doesn't sound like anybody got COVID or is going to spread it back to their gyms. It's like, cool, you know what? That's a pretty good job.
Yeah.
If we look back at some of the events, what were the things you think could have been programmed better or differently?
Well, I think the one thing that always stands out to me is ball slams are not actually ball slams, right? And I mean, that's like sort of a ticky-tack complaint, but you know, in training, if you're doing a ball slam, the point of it is to be like a hip flexion, you know, like downwardly explosive movement, but there's no way to actually test that in a competitive setting other than, I don't know, I guess you could like put people on like a force plate. Yeah. Or like a carnival type of thing where you have to throw the ball and it has to like hit some sort of bell or something. And if it doesn't hit the bell.
They should do that. They should just, all of like the really old circus events, carnival tricks, strongman things, like all of those things that were sort of, you know, maybe 100 years ago were commonplace in for people's entertainment. They should do that. Take
it back to the softball throw, but it's actually Dave just sitting over a tank of water.
There you go. Wasn't that a thing too? Wasn't there like a Dunk Dave Castro thing at some point? Am I making that up?
I don't remember that.
I don't know. It's possible.
I don't know where that's from.
John, do you remember that TV show, Get Your Own Back? Where they used to, I'm talking about UK kids TV here. So where the parent sits in the chair and the kid can basically dunk them or and then drop them. Yeah, they should do that. How do you think they're going to progress the sort of the idea with the? So they've done a chaos event where they would just basically said, okay, this is the next movement that you have to do. They did that a couple of years ago, and then obviously they've done this element of unknown of run, run for an hour. We're going to extend it at the half-hour point to double it. But like, how do you think that they can sort of extend that or develop that element of the unknown and the unknowable?
So I actually
just drop them on a deserted island one day and turn it into the Hunger Games.
It could happen. I did want to touch on that because you mentioned something about that earlier, Luke, where I don't think that this year had anything that was as like quote unquote shocking, right? That there was still definitely some like gamesmanship in theater and like testing athletes' mental capacity with, the surprise run back, all that type of stuff, which again, you sort of have to accept that that's part of CrossFit's testing model is like, okay, the way we define fitness as being able to do 800 reps of upper body pulling in a weekend and like reacting to uncertainty, and if you agree to that, like that's cool. But I actually almost enjoyed that there wasn't anything as whatever, like quote unquote out of the box, where it's like, oh, surprise, like here's this new movement, or this is heavier than you thought, or like here's a gymnastics thing that you have to do that you didn't expect. That the testing was actually just like pretty broad and very difficult and cleverly designed. And I almost prefer that, right? That there's a little bit less of that element of gotcha in the testing and more just like, hey, this is a really challenging test across a lot of different domains, and we're going to see who's actually the best. So I prefer that, honestly.
I mean, there were a few things. We talked about it before on the swim workout. The interval structure, the throwing no rounds in reverse as a way of doing it as a nice workout. I personally think that workout was too swim biased. 10 GHDs, 10 ball ground to overheads, 15 10 cows on a bike was kind of inconsequential for the most part. But, that kind of thing I thought was pretty good. Atalanta, like, I don't think it wasn't like a shock of different movements you didn't expect or something like that. But it was definitely a huge volume workout. And as you're looking at it, you kind of think about Murph and you're like, yeah, Murph doesn't seem so bad. Like 100 pull-ups, well, this one had 300. 300 air squats, over 200 pistols for sure. Like, Murph seemed pretty nice of a workout after seeing Atalanta. But you're right, I don't think there was a shock. I think there was some biases one way or another. Like there seems to be a lot of running-based workouts.
That's always the case at the games, though. People are always like, the games have too much running. I'm a CrossFitter with short limbs. I just want to do burpees.
Yeah, I mean, I get that people don't like running. But, I mean, there was... So, on the first day, there was the hill sprint, which was not really running in sense of... It wasn't a running workout, even though it was running. And then they had the long run. And then day 2, there was the final event with the burpees and thrusters and the run up the hill. And then the final day, there was the sled sprint and the run in Atalanta, which, again, the run in Atalanta and the run in the sled sprint weren't necessarily the defining factors of that workout. But it was definitely I would say a run-heavy year. I don't think there's usually that much of a clear-cut running events.
What I think was cool was the in the interval workout they had to go. Like they couldn't pace it in any sense. It was like they had to go, and you could see that from the start because you just saw the drop off from the other athletes. So it was a real good test of sort of repeatability in that sense. And then as well as that, I think the hill run and then the sled sprint and that type of stuff. It's like unless you actually do that, and also the bike to a certain degree as well. I'm just flicking through. I can't really see any others, but there was definitely some tests there where it was, unless you've done this in training, just to have some exposure to it, that type of stuff can really just wreck you. And cause a lot of people just to, melt and burn down in the middle of a workout and an event. I think that you can obviously have athletes who are like very resilient to that type of stuff, but for instance, the sled sprint, just watching people changing the angles of their body position on the run and stuff like that. Generally speaking, you don't want to be teaching people to push a sled upright, but that's definitely something that people have sort of figured out with an empty sled in CrossFit and those styles of events, is like, do that so that you can drive forward and you can lean into your run a little bit more. So yeah, there was definitely, the corn sack sprint, just watching that was really, you just knew how bad that was. I think especially if you've done anything like that, any sort of, I remember doing hill sprints as a kid, and having some like old fat dude screaming at you to go quicker with a fag in his mouth.
Cigarette.
Yeah, cigarette. Yeah. So thanks, John.
just to clarify.
Yeah.
One thing that did stand out to me was it was very light on barbell movements.
Yeah.
So there was no barbell in day 3. There was the shoulder to overhead in day 1 and the total. And then there was the snatch ladder and the thrusters in day 2. And that was it. There was no deadlifts, no clean of any kind, no lighter snatches.
If you look at the pre-qualifying for that though, it was pretty much barbell and everything, right? So
yeah. There was thrusters, overhead squats, heavy front squat, deadlift, clean. Yeah, there was a lot for sure. Maybe it was the setting they were in was less conducive to barbell workouts. But yeah, there were really only 2 metcons with barbells, and that was the shoulder to overhead and the thruster. The snatch ladder and the total not being like a conditioning piece, more of a strength. So,
what did you guys think of the toes to bar lunge workout? Other than us having to tell everyone to not hold kettlebells in a front rack position, like they were when they're actually doing carries and training and in the gym.
That's a good example of the difference between training and competition.
Yeah,
it's like we're not gonna lunge like that. We're not gonna hold a front rack like that when we're training. Yeah. But sure, in your competition, trying to make it as easy as you can, then yeah.
Yeah, from that perspective, I would have just rathered it was dumbbells, right?
Yeah.
Because then the dumbbells are just awkward no matter what you do. And to clarify for people who aren't listening, or who are listening who maybe didn't see the event or aren't sure what we're talking about, there was like a kettlebell lunge, and everyone sort of did this crazy thing where they draped the kettlebells kind of over their back and flared their elbows out wide, which makes it pretty easy to hold the kettlebells. And in training, when we prescribe like some sort of kettlebell front rack thing, we're always telling people, hey, like keep your thumbs together between your collarbones and your elbows down on your ribs, which absolutely sucks. It's horrible, right? And so, the kettlebell just sort of becomes like a dumbbell that's actually somewhat easier to maneuver in that situation. So yeah, I would have rather seen that with dumbbells. You
can just create that hole in your arms, and then it just balances on your some people just like press them into their face. Yeah. They got their like faces getting viced together.
Yep. I'd have liked to see it as a sandbag lunge personally.
Yeah.
Like a single sandbag on the shoulder.
That works too.
Do you think the cycle speed of that was like, the volume for that, everyone was, I suppose that is, you could say that's testing a sprint essentially, but do you think that would, but it was also maybe just testing like, all right, who sort of put their kettlebells in the right spot on when they were transitioning, right? So I think that was interesting to watch, because you saw Noah and you saw Katrin just go out ahead, and then because Matt and Tia were just a bit more careful in their placement, and they probably were talking about this together beforehand, they end up, being able to catch up, and you don't want to have a foot race with either of those two towards the end.
I also don't remember a time when Noah paced himself at the start of a workout.
I thought he was. I don't know. I thought he may have learnt a little bit more. He's definitely more aerobic than he used to be, but still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do actually like some events like that where the limiter isn't just like, okay, at what point are you going to break down on this super high volume of gymnastic stuff, right? Because you see that in open workouts where the strategy is just kind of like, all right, you have to do whatever, 115 handstand push-ups. At what point do you lose it? And it kind of doesn't matter what you do. It's just like, well, I lose it after 83 of these, whereas this person can get through 97 of them before they lose it, you know? And I think that's a little bit less interesting from a testing perspective. So I do kind of like some events like this where you do just sort of have to go. But I think the thing you have to be cautious of, Luke, sort of like you mentioned, is like, okay, is the separator then going to be something kind of dumb? Like, you know, where is someone holding their kettlebells or how they set them up? Or is it going to be something dumb, you know, just like how long are their arms or legs? So, you know, there are some potential dangers with that, although I didn't think this workout, I don't know, fell too far into any of those pitfalls. So I sort of enjoyed it. Any final thoughts on these games workouts?
Yeah, overall, I was a fan. I think it's one of the better programmed years.
Yeah, same.
I just wish it had been with a full field to see how that played out. And we would have had issues with trying to run some of those events with a full field in terms of timing and heats and all that kind of stuff.
Also true.
But that being said, I like the workouts. I think that's good.
Thanks for listening. While you're here, go ahead and head over to your podcast player, subscribe to the show, give it a rating, give it a review, all that good stuff. You can also go ahead and click through to the show notes where you can find out more about us at legionsc.com and also follow us on Instagram at legion.sc.